Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the booth. I'm here with Skura, and we're bringing you all the action from Eternal Weekend in Prague. This is going to be round number 2 of the Legacy main event, and I believe we have two exciting matchups for you. One between, I think the main match is Mark Tobias on the Doomsday combo deck, playing against Tim Schubring, playing Grixis Delvers. So, Philip, please walk us through this combo deck.
Yeah, so the moment I looked at this deck list, I immediately saw it's a bit different than some lists. You don't have any discard main deck, but you do have the One Ring, Teferi Time Raveler, both 3 copies, and Veils of Summer, 3 copies main phase, in addition to Force of Will and Days. So there is so much protection, and I guess Mark really doesn't want to lose to counter magic. So he's really well prepared for that. And triple veil is a very interesting inclusion. Now, crucially, what Mark might be doing this match is just playing veil at the beginning of his turn, basically like a silence of sorts, and then try to go off.
So, in a quick summary, what is this deck trying to do? What is this Doomsday combo deck trying to do? What's your big combo finish?
The big thing is the Doomsday card that allows you to stack. That basically you get to look at the whole deck, exile 5 specific cards, and then your library becomes these 5 cards. And one of the cards will be Thassa's Oracle, probably. And because you've got just 5 cards in the deck, you string a couple of spells and you win with Oracle, potentially on the very same turn. Now, if Oracle is in hand, that will affect the piles. And in general, there are multiple piles to be built. But that's the general overview. You want to have a small library with Doomsday, win with Oracle. And the opponent is Grixis Delver, the deck we've seen already.
Yeah, Mark is a well-known European brewer. He always brings some very spicy decks. I always love to see him at the Legacy European Tour events, especially the regional championships, where he always brings some combo deck to the Pioneer events that nobody really saw before. And most players, despite seeing the entire deck list before the match starts, they usually have no clue what is going on because these decks are usually that weird. So Mark, definitely a very well-known brewer. He likes his combo decks. On the other side of the table, we have Tim with, Grixis Delver, a pretty typical deck for Legacy. We already had it on the stream for round 1. A lot of cheap threats, cheap card selection, removal spells, and obviously a lot of counters. So typically I would favor a deck like this against combo. A deck that has cards like Force of Will, possibly cards like Force of Negation. You have cards like Days, plus the cheap threats. Sometimes if you're playing Grixis, maybe you have cards like Thoughtseize as well. So typically I would favor Grixis Delver in a matchup like this. But as you mentioned, Mark has a lot of ways to stop the opponent from countering their cards, from looking at their hand, and a lot of protection from the combo.
Yeah, exactly. So normally I would agree with you that Delver is pretty favored, and pressure with proper disruption is the way to go. Now, crucially, just disruption or just clock won't cut it. But Mark's version might be really good. So Teferi Time Raveler not only stops counter magic, but also bounces Murktide Regent, which is a major threat. And so basically Mark can play multiple must answer cards, and Tim might just not have enough to be able to counter them all. Because if Mark says, okay, Teferi, okay, the One Ring, okay, turn 5, Veil with Doomsday, like it's so difficult to actually counter everything. And now Tim brainstorms end step, sees a bunch of lands, but unfortunately, because he did it on the end step, he will redraw one of them. It's one of the dynamics that we have talked about. It's better sometimes to wait till your main phase and actually shuffle everything away rather than have to redraw.
You get one card deeper into your deck, and then you can correct the fetch line to shuffle 2 cards back. And this is a matchup where Tim is probably not going to be trying to play around Orcish Bowmasters, right? Mark does have access to black, but this is a deck that only really cares about its combo finish, and you are not really running the creatures like Bowmasters because you don't really have any use for them in your deck. They don't even, bitch into the Force of Will or anything. So if it's not blue, it doesn't really fit.
Yeah. However, what I would like to mention is that Tim actually doesn't know it's Doomsday, right? Because he rates us,
Oh,
right? Because let's remember, it's still closed deck list. So while we know it's Doomsday, Tim could be thinking of anything, right? It could be like a slow, Sultai, whatever, draw. But it's actually, okay, now Street Wraith is kind of a giveaway.
that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. All Mark did was play a Ponder, get an Underground Sea, and play and a fetch land. Yeah, so as you said, that might as well have been Delver, and maybe for that reason, Tim decided to cast a Brainstorm at the end of Mark's first turn to make sure he doesn't walk straight into the Bowmasters. So very good point there. I would like to compliment both players. Mark on the black border duels, like those are really
Yeah.
really cool. And Tim on that super cool cowboy hat. So both
Yeah.
players bringing their A game into the match.
Yeah, that's true. And now we see a foil army token get in, 2 damage down to 15. But Mark is playing it slow because he's got really important cards to play early, like, an early, Doomsday, early Teferi Time Raveler. But I think he's just waiting for the perfect moment. Now he's got Teferi, so he could play Island, Teferi, Hold Up Veil. But I think there are actually a lot of permutations of what he could do. There is Doomsday, Edge of Autumn, Lotus Petal. And this is why I love combo decks like these, like combo decks with card selection, because it's not even important whether your combo is good enough. It's also when you go for it. And I really, this dynamic of when.
So the Fairy Time Raveler in this Doomsday deck that is aiming to cast a triple black card, is this just to protect the combo? Is it because it can also be pitched to Force of Will? Like what's the thinking here behind playing 4 colors to cast all these cards? Like how does the Fairy fit into the deck?
Yeah, so Teferi has got a lot going for it. So it pitches, as you said, it provides passive protection. It also bounces threats like Murktide Regent. It can also bounce your own Thassa's Oracle if you play it early, which I doubt happens, but I guess it could. It could make your library a bit smaller after Doomsday Pile to help you win that way. But we actually see Doomsday, so not Teferi.
Wow.
Doomsday on the battlefield. Tim responds with Force of Will, and we've got Veil backup. That's all game 1. Oh,
yeah, you're
my.
probably thinking like, wait, this is game 1. What the hell is this doing in your deck?
Oh my god. And also, it makes you think what possibly could be Mark's sideboard if he's got Teferi and Veil main deck already.
Right.
But we'll see if there's any response. Daze doesn't do it. Oh, Bolt you. Okay, so let me get into Doomsday's actual text, because in addition to being this combo piece, it has the part where it says you lose half of your life total rounded up. So Mark being at 14, he would go down to 7. Now, there is an argument that if you allow Mark to lose half the life total and then you bolt, you actually get more damage relatively through than if you do it pre-Doomsday.
All right, so what is Mark typically going to be looking for here? We know that the end game ends with Thassa's Oracle, winning the game for Mark with no cards in his library, right? So what are typically going to be the 5 cards here that he's going to be looking for, given that he has, I think, 3 duels in play producing black and an island?
Yeah, so basically there are 2 types of like broad categories of piles, which is, do I make a pile and then pass the turn, or do I make a pile so that I try to win now? So we know that Mark has got 1 cantrip in hand, being Edge of Autumn. So he has a way to draw into that 5-card library, right? So he could try to stack up a way to win this turn, which could be really tempting because Tim clearly has nothing else. But he would also set up a pile which is a bit safer and pass the turn. So we can see Oracle, of course, on the bottom. But I think Mark himself doesn't really know how to properly arrange that. There are multiple options. A Lotus Pool will put to the front, a Force of Will in hand. So we see Lead, Consider, Street Wraith, Thassa's Oracle.
I think there's a Brainstorm as well.
Brainstorm. Yes, because with Edge of Autumn, you can draw into the Brainstorm. Then you can Brainstorm, But the issue is that you have to be able to have lead, crack, add blue, and then get mana. But what you can also do is, for example, play a cantrip, then crack lead, and then draw into Thassa's Oracle. So there are so many things possible going on. And not only is it important what kind of cards you've got in the pile, but it's also important, what order of cards you put them in.
Well, there's also the Bowmasters in play, so this has to be pretty hard for Mark to get through, right? Like, is he gonna be able to win this turn?
I think he's trying to, because he's drawing 3 cards where none of them are Thassa's Oracle. Thassa's Oracle is on the bottom of the library. Then you play Lead. You cycle Street Wraith, hold priority. Then you crack Lead for triple blue. Then redraw with the Wraith. You can also actually double do it because you can put Street Wraith on the stack and then Edge of Autumn on the stack. So basically you have double cantrip on top. Then you crack Lead, double draw, play Oracle. I hope what I'm saying makes sense.
Right, and we also, the Veil of Summer effect is actually valid for the entire turn. It's not just for that one moment for a spell to stack. So Mark does have hexproof from black until the end of the turn, so he cannot be targeted by the Bowmaster pings. So that's why he's able to draw the cards, play the Thassa's Oracle, and win the game. So 1-0 for Mark. He was able to execute his combo even through the Bowmasters, even through the Lightning Bolt,
Force of Will,
all the other interaction from him. I think Mark even had 2 forces in his own hand at the end of that game. So he had everything covered.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really nice. I'm curious if we're going to see even more interesting piles, but this one was a kind of classic. I mean, out of probably a million possible classics, which is the win where you put a cantrip on the stack, crack LED for triple blue, and then go from there. Now we see sideboarding. And the Doomsday deck has got access to multiple interesting cards. So the green in the deck can cast Carpet of Flowers, and Veil of Summer. You also have got Prismatic Ending and Swords to Plowshares that complement Teferi Time Raveler as the blue, as the white splash.
So that's a lot of defensive cards or a lot of interactive cards. Do these combo decks, if you're Tim, do these combo decks typically have some kind of transformational sideboard? Like, hey, I don't want to rely only on the combo. Maybe I'll bring in whatever, like a Delver package, maybe some other, is there anything these combo decks typically bring in out of their sideboard to try to surprise their opponents with something else than the combo?
So if I were Tim, there would be one thing I could transformationally be aware of, and that's Murktide Regent. Murktide Regent is typically played, or maybe is the threat of choice if you want to go that route. Now, the issue with Murktide in general is that if Tim plays Pyroblast, it counters all the counter magic, Teferi, and then it will also counter Murktide. So it kind of walks into cards you'd like to have anyways. But Mark has got the threat density in the main deck already with Teferi and the One Ring. So he might not need to actually steer a bit and have a different plan. He might solidify his plan even more there. Or maybe actually, get less on the combo, bring more protection, but not for the combo itself, but for the Teferi, the One Ring plan.
Yeah, so I like that Teferi gives you like a very nice proactive way to protect your combo. It's a card that doesn't just stop your opponent from resolving their counters. It stops their entire hand in a lot of situations, and it also bounces Murktide or a threat back into their hand.
Yeah, exactly. There are also interesting piles that involve one of the cards that we've seen, which is Cavern of Souls, because Cavern of Souls can name the the type for Thassa's Oracle, which is Merfolk or Wizard, and have it resolve every time because it has to, because of Cavern of Souls. So, which could be a part of the pile, or it may have been drawn earlier. But that's why you see Dress Down sometimes in the sideboards to stop a caverned Thassa's Oracle, because you don't really have any other way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Dress Down does turn off the Oracle preemptively. That makes sense.
So Martin, if you were the Grixis Delver player, would you try to be a control deck against this combo deck, or be like an aggro strategy? How would you like to approach it?
Yeah, I don't want to give them a lot of time. I just want to make sure I keep a hand that has the cheap threats. I want to start on a Delver or the Dragon's Rage Channeler. Now that I know what they're on, I know that I have to be aggressive. I don't have to try to play around Bowmasters or anything like that. So I'm going to be looking for definitely a Force of Will, but also definitely the cheap threats. I want to start with a 1-drop, or at least have a Brainstorm and Fetch Land. But I would really be looking for those aggressive openers. Something I'm looking at in Mark's sideboard is Shield Dread. Where does that typically come in? Is that the transformational sort of card, or is that the okay? Well, you have too much stuff to stop me from comboing off. I'm just gonna play Shield Dread, and well, there's not that many ways to deal with a 4/5. Is that something Mark is considering bringing in?
So Mark could bring it in this matchup, although I would expect it to be brought in against maybe other decks that draw a lot of cards, maybe other combo decks or static decks that don't do anything, maybe like lands. But crucially, Mark can turbo out that Shield Red with Dark Ritual.
Yeah.
So it's not a 4-drop, essentially. It could be played on turn 2. Now, the One Ring can also be played on turn 2 with Dark Ritual. Now, of course, you could have multiple rituals and play it on turn 1. So that's also another possibility. But the point is that with the One Ring and potentially Shield Red and Doomsday, Dark Ritual can pull a lot of weight in these games. And we see a hand of Teferi, Force of Will, Veil, Triple Land. Super slow hand. Super slow. Basically, not playing a spell until turn 3. Even if Edge of Autumn, not Veil.
What does Mark's deck do about Orcish Bowmasters? Like that's a card that a lot of people in the format are playing right now. Are you just relying on your forces and maybe Teferi bouncing it into their hand, or is that big of a deal for your deck?
Yes, I would say there are 2 answers to it. So first of all, you might just not care because you win without actually drawing that many cards. Because when you lose half your life total with Doomsday, you go down to 10. But let's say you go down to 8-ish. You actually need to draw just maybe like 2 or 3 cards to actually get the win. So that's not that threatening. Because you don't need to draw the whole library. Tata's Oracle still allows you to win with 2 cards in the library there. Also, you might side in Prismatic Ending, Swords to Plowshares, to have a very clean way to answer these threats. So, as Mark, I wouldn't be so scared. But he's already contemplating the first land drop. So he cycles Street Wraiths.
Yeah,
and it's not... So it's not obvious that you should cycle first to see what you draw, because it's a key way to draw into your Doomsday pile, right? So there is value in keeping it for later.
Right. Yeah. Something you should be doing when you're keeping your hand is not just thinking about, do I keep this, do I mulligan? But you should also be planning your first turns in ahead, at least the first couple, so that you don't just play your first land, then start thinking, because that gives away what you could possibly have. So when you're keeping that opening hand, I think I learned that earlier in my Magic career. I remember being paired against Paulo in a feature match, like playing for a top 8 of the PT or something, and Paulo mulligans a 6, and he thinks for a really long time, and then he proceeds to beat the hell out of me in like 4 turns with this Dark Depths combo deck. I'm like, what were you thinking? Looks like your hand was perfect. Like, what is this? And he's like, well, I was thinking what to play in my first 2 turns. And I'm like, wow, that actually makes so much sense. It made me think like your hand is bad, and I kind of like played in a way, and like I'm like, well, that was a great lesson. And yeah, I think in Legacy it is even more like that, because there are so many things you can do. So try to think about that before you play your first land and before you give information away. So in the meanwhile, Tim, with the opening draw that he was hoping for, turn one threat, Dragon's Rage Channeler, not only a good aggressive threat, but also a way to fix his draws, and he was already able to get a bunch of triggers thanks to that Mishra's Bauble, and I believe now he is casting a Ponder.
Yeah, exactly. Now, crucially, he decided to play Ponder instead of deploying Orcish Bowmasters or Delver Hold Up Spell Pierce. So it's possible that he wants to hold up Spell Pierce and have Delver for the Force of Will. but that's super, super conservative then. But Mark says, okay, no problem. Just draws his card. There are actually 4 types already because Artifact, Land, Instant Sorcery. So this DRC already attacks in for 3.
This is an interesting situation. Mark casting Brainstorm on one land before playing his second land. That can signal so many different things. It can mean that, well, I don't have a second land. If you have a fours here, I'm going to be in deep trouble because I really counted on being able to look at my top 3. But what it can also mean is, hey, I really want you to daze this. This would set you back a little bit, but maybe I would have a better chance at casting Teferi next turn. So there are so many different things that go through my mind when somebody does that. I think it is on purpose here from Mark to play that before playing his second land.
And also, to add to your analysis, Tim accidentally revealed Spell Pierce, which Mark had seen.
Wow.
So and despite that, Mark still played Brainstorm like that, saying, "Yeah, no worries, just Spell Pierce it. I'm ready." And Tim didn't. So
Tim doesn't blink, keeps his counters, realizing that perhaps these are not the cards I want to fight for. I would like to fight over the Teferi and the Doomsday. So I'm going to let you have your card selection pieces, which is also another sub game, right? Like you are Tim. You're sitting there. Your opponent has this one combo finish, but you also know that they need to set it up. They need the right lands. They need the protection spells. So should you counter the card selection pieces? Should you counter the setup, or do you want to save it for the combo? What are you thinking in this regard if you are Tim?
Yeah, so I think there a lot comes down to your personal preference, because I really hate countering cantrips in general, personally, especially because you're countering a 1-mana spell with a 1-mana spell. I'd rather try to snipe something a bit more expensive. Now, you can try to, because the upside is high, right? The opponent just loses the game probably because they keep missing land drops, right? But the floor is also pretty low because you're still countering just a cantrip. So I think the question is how, the floor ceiling of the play you want to achieve. But now we see Teferi, and that it's a Spell Pierce, which Mark could have forced back, but he didn't.
Yeah,
attacks for 6.
This was a great Spell Pierce for them. Like you mentioned, it is much better in a game of Magic to trade 1 of your mana for 3 of your opponent. So Tim waits for the right moment, saves the Spell Pierce, basically uses it as a time walk here. Mark spends his entire turn 3 casting Teferi. Tim stops that with a 1-mana card, and meanwhile he's attacking with 2 channelers. So this game looks like it might be over very quickly.
Yeah, but I actually think it might be over, but with Mark winning it rather than Tim, because Mark could have countered, he didn't. I think he's just reading into what Tim is doing, and he just feels very safe in what's happening. I think he's just, because he knows he's got 3 more turns or 2 more turns before he actually dies. So he's like, okay, play a spell, and win on the last turn I can. So I actually sense strength from Mark. He's got a full hand. Yeah, I think he's cooking something.
let him cook. The life totals might not be updated. We're running into some issues. We're going to try to have that fixed as soon as possible. But yeah, this might be a 2-turn clock. It might be a 1-turn clock. We're not exactly sure. I think I see is that a Snuff Out in Mark's hand, or is that a Shieldred?
I think it's Shieldred.
Okay, so he did bring it in for the matchup. That's interesting. But as you mentioned, it is a deck where you can just play it on turn 2 with a Dark Ritual. Although now I believe it might be Doomsday.
I think it's both, actually. I mean, that are both cards. That are 2 cards. So now we see Brainstorm into Brainstorm. Price of Progress on top.
Ooh, that's a lot of damage possibly coming in.
Yeah, but he actually ditches it. Because he wanted, I think that's exactly wanted to find.
Wow. More
but he has
interactive spells.
Yeah, so he got double Days 4. So this double Brainstorm really came in handy. Oh my god.
One more card needs to be put on top. Okay, there it is.
Yeah.
So 2 cards back, and now Tim has double Dace and a Force and a 1-turn clock in play, I believe. Those 2 channelers are going to be able to attack for 6 next turn.
Yeah, and he just ditches the fetch lands he put on top. He actually keeps one of them. But Mark says, crack pay, Force of Days. Yeah. Again, survival triggers. I mean, he kept the card on top, so I assume he keeps again.
Delver is one of those decks where you really need to be mindful of all the triggers. Mishra's Bauble, keep in mind you have to draw a card, all these Dragon's Ray Channeler triggers, Delver flipping in the upkeep, making sure you shuffle the deck at the right time with Brainstorms.
Wow.
And yeah, I think Tim did everything right. As you mentioned, he used those Brainstorm and those triggers to not only look for impactful cards, threats or whatever, but he needed those answers. He needed those counter magic spells. He did find double Days in that last Brainstorm, which allowed him to win the counter war over the Teferi, and the 2 channelers were able to finish off Mark on Tim's next turn. So we are moving on to game 3, I believe.
Yeah, wow. So if it was just 1 Days, it still wouldn't have been enough. So Tim, perfect combination to stop Mark in his tracks. But now Mark is on the play. So what it allows is a turn 1 Dark Ritual Doomsday through Days, because the opponent has no lands in play, so they cannot Days at all. So being on the play, huge for Mark. But actually, if Mark didn't have these protective pieces like Teferi, but actually had just God Honest, Swords to Plowshares or Prismatic Ending, he would have been in much better shape. So yeah, this might be something to take into consideration. And I see the One Ring sided out, Thoughts is in the board, Force of Negation in the board as well. Dark Ritual actually sided out on the play. It might just be. But I think he's still going through his options. We'll see if what he lands on. Carpet of Flowers in the deck provides a nice mana boost.
Boarding out Force of Will in a matchup like this, what's the logic behind that? Because you are the combo deck, you want to protect your combo. Is this because you perhaps have better cards out of the sideboard that you don't need to 2-4-1 yourself? Do you expect your opponent to have way too many cards to counter so that, well, there are too many of them, so I don't want 2-4-1 myself. I would rather just bring some of these 1-4-1 answers out of my sideboard. What's the logic here? I would be thinking, if I'm trying to protect my combo, Force of Will has to be one of the best cards.
So the big issue with Force of Will is that the more copies you have, the worse it gets. Because when you have the second Force of Will, then suddenly you need 2 blue cards to make it actually effective. So the first Force is actually decent, but I think you don't really want to draw the second or the third Force. And this could be the logic there. You also have all the Veils of Summers to already protect your combo, and the Teferi. So it's like a mix of redundancy and the fact that you don't want them in multiples, I think. So yeah, so players are shuffling up. Now we saw Tim with Price of Progress, so not a card maybe we see that often nowadays. So it deals damage to each player, so each player, not each opponent, equal to twice the number of non-basics. So if, for example, Mark has 3 lands in play, he will get domed for 6 damage. That's huge. That's huge. And then it scales, the longer the game goes. So, this Price of Progress could end games very swiftly if unattended.
Yeah, Price of Progress is one of those cards that, like, you keep thinking the game's over. I have this. I'm playing this 5-color deck. I have it all row on the battlefield, Teferi, and then all of a sudden, there's this Price of Progress for 10, and
yeah, exactly
just ending these games.
Exactly. So now we see Carpet of Flowers on the very first turn. So what Carpet does is that during your main phase, you may add X mana, where X is the number of islands target opponent controls. So basically, it scales, right? Because you get 1 mana, then 2, then 3. Usually, that's how it's going to go. So it's basically like a delayed way to provide you that boost. So instead of Dark Ritual, that's a one-off shot. You get 1, 2, 3, 4. You can also spend that mana not even comboing, but just something as simple as playing multiple cantrips. So for example, Tim doesn't fetch, and so Tim has no islands. Carpet does nothing.
Yeah, that's gonna change very quickly though. as soon as Tim starts cracking these lands to start casting his card selection spells, he's gonna get some islands into play, and that's gonna give Mark a huge advantage. Because the more mana you have, the less impactful cards like Daze get, the less impactful cards like Spell Pierce get. So
yeah,
definitely a great card to have there for Mark on turn 1, who proceeds with a Ponder. So basically, this is all the, not only the combo decks doing this format, but basically any blue deck in this format is going to run Brainstorm. A lot of them run Ponder. Most of the legacy decks just spend the first couple turns playing these card selection pieces and looking for those important cards for the matchup. There's a lot of shuffling involved, but that's great for Ponder, right? That's why Lorien Revealed is such an important card. By putting cards back on top that you don't want, you can use these fetch lands and the cards like Lorien Revealed to shuffle them back into your library and draw something else. Things can change very quickly in Legacy. If you're watching a player who has a terrible hand, they are losing on board. That can change very quickly with the draw of one Brainstorm, drawing into another one, cracking a fetch land, shuffling the top, playing another Brainstorm. All of a sudden, you're looking at 5 new cards, and things can change very quickly.
Yeah, certainly. Now, the key thing, I think, is to know what you're looking for. Because if you're just cantripping for the sake of cantripping, you might not actually get anywhere, right? Like your Ponder is much better if you know you're looking for a removal spell, rather than I'm pondering, let's see what happens. But now we see Brainstorm into Ponder, keep everything. So that seems like basically he played Reach Through Mists. Just one mana, draw a card, because Brainstorm put everything back, no shuffle, Ponder, no shuffle.
And Tim drew I believe a Delver this turn, so he's going to be able to play Delver and start pressuring Mark, but that is also going to bring his island count to 2.
Yeah.
Which means that next round, Mark is potentially looking at having 5 mana, which is exactly where you want to be against a deck full of Dazes and Spell Pierces. So we're gonna see what Mark is able to do with all that. Perhaps cast a Teferi. See if he plays anything like Lorien Revealed. Like, we keep thinking of Lorien Revealed as a way to shuffle your library and pitch to forest, but 5 mana, like sometimes you just go to 5 and cast it as Ancestral Recall. So
and as you're saying that, we see a Ponder again, 3rd cantrip in a row. So Tim is sculpting his hand, so he might as well just, Ponder, take just one best card, shuffle with a fetchland. Ponder, okay, Ponder kept again everything on top. So this could be a sign of strength. So it depends how Mark reads it, but...
Yeah, me looking at Tim's hand from my position of seeing the Delver, that reads as a weakness, right? Because normally I would rather present the threat and then sit on my counters and make sure that I can clock the opponent. Here, Tim is saying, well, I don't have a force. I need to try to find one, because otherwise, if my opponent resolves the fairy, then all my counters can become useless. So he uses that mana to cast Ponder, tries to find an interactive card, a counterspell instead.
Wow.
Doesn't get it, but the fairy resolves, and we know that Tim does have Pyroblast, but Mark is going to be the one who's going to have the final word. Because we know that he cannot counter back if Mark has some response to it.
Yeah, and then the Carpet allowed him to just pay 1 mana for Teferi, holding up, as I can see, Brainstorm, Swords to Plowshares, and Veil. So let's see how that goes. Pyroblast on Teferi, Time Raveler. And so, because what Veil says, that spells you control cannot be countered, and permanents and you gain hexproof from blue and black. And historically, red is not blue or black, so Veil doesn't really work. And so, Carpet of Flowers, add mana, and we have Brainstorm with mana floating, it seems. So I would assume it's blue. So we would have double blue up, Brainstorm. That's a good way to start the turn off with. But now Tim might respawn and counter that cantrip. He has cantripped so much that he doesn't really want Mark to do the same. Now Mark has got Swords to Plowshares, so not only does Tim not have any pressure, but Mark can also alleviate any potential pressure. And this is exactly what we see here. Bowmasters, trigger, swords it. We'll see maybe a counter back if there are any. Double checking the hand. I think there is. Tim keeping the cards close to the chest, isn't he? Okay.
I think Mark was doing that with the trigger on the stack. So Bowmasters does get exiled. One irrelevant life for Tim. That's not really what this matchup is about.
Yeah, and for people maybe tuning in, Tim's maybe mannerism of placing the graveyard is so that the cards sideways are his graveyard, actually. And Bowmasters is in exile, contrary to what most people do, which is the sideways cards are exile, and the vertical ones would be graveyard. So the graveyard is full, and Mark draws with resolves the Brainstorm and then passes back. So this could be tricky.
Is there something that can go wrong with Doomsday? So typically you have decks where you have combo decks where, they're typically combo pieces you don't want to draw in your hand, right? Even if you play something like Natural Order with Greater Hoof Behemoth or Progenitus or Atroxa, those are the cards you don't want to draw in your hand. Yeah. Is Doomsday running the risk of some of these cards, appearing in your hand when you would be like, wow, now I can't combo, what am I going to do? I have to hope that I draw a Brainstorm. Or is this a deck where, even if you draw your Oracle in your hand, that doesn't matter. You can simply cast it from your hand later on.
Yeah, exactly. This is the strength of the deck. The only fail rate, let's say, is just drawing multiple Doomsdays. But there's nothing you can draw that you're unhappy with, because if you draw the Cavern of Souls, you can just work it into the equation of making the pile. If you draw Thassa's Oracle, you'll just make a different pile, maybe with multiple Veils and fast mana. An Oracle will just be deployed from hand. So there is no risk like that, thankfully for Mark. Carpet of Flowers, trigger. Oh my god, add mana, 2 mana. Lorien revealed! You foreshadowed it pretty well, pretty nice.
There it is. So the 5 mana draw 3. It's not only a way to fix your mana, it's not only a way to pitch into Force of Will, not only a way for you to shuffle your deck after a Brainstorm, but sometimes you actually just cast it for 5 and draw 3 cards.
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically Concentrate. Right? Is that the name of the card? Concentrate.
Right. Yeah.
Draw 4 mana, draw 3. It was 4 mana though. So Days pay. Oh, and Tim. Okay, so Dim literally just said, Days will destroy your Lotus Petal.
Yeah, perhaps thinking, well, you already have Carpet of Flowers in play, and you're gonna get more and more mana. So maybe it's best if I just use this Days here to sort of, deprive you of 1 mana. Moving forward, he also gets to trigger the Dragon's Rage Channeler, put another card in the graveyard. That was Price of Progress, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. Price of Progress that got dazed. And now I think it's a super crucial situation because Mark did not have any land to deploy, which was super unfortunate after Lorien revealed. However, thanks to Days countering Price of Progress, he could redeploy it as a land and immediately exile Channeler. So the timing on Price of Progress was really punishing for Tim.
Yeah.
So Legacy. Yeah.
Looking at Mark's hand, he does not seem to have a lot of combo pieces, right? He has a lot of ways to set up, but on the other hand, he's not really under any pressure right now. There's only the 1/1 token, chipping away every turn, but that still gives him plenty of time. He does not have another land though, so that Brainstorm, he is really going to be hoping for that one to resolve.
Yeah, so thankfully for Mark, he's got always virtually more mana thanks to Tim's land count because of Carpet of Flowers. Because had it not been for the carpet, Mark would be in real trouble there.
And what you're thinking here with Wasteland, you have the option to destroy a white source, which obviously you need for cards like Lethari or Swords of Plowshares, or you have the option to go after the green source, which in game one you saw how important Veil of Summer was. So what are you thinking there?
So I would so basically Veil allows you to play instant speed while in other words, when you're in the opponent's combat, it's stack. It's really important to be able to play Veil, while white removal can be played anytime. So I think I'd rather cut the opponent off of Veil because of that. Because of course Mark can add green mana or white mana anytime with Carpet, but
Okay.
adding green with Carpet isn't relevant except for your own main phase. So that's
right. Carpet of Flowers does give you any colors of mana. It's not just blue.
Yeah.
I usually like to think of it as like, it's a card for my blue deck, splashing green against another blue deck. So I'm going to have more blue mana. But as you mentioned, it can produce any colors of mana, which is important exactly in this situation. Mark's able to cast a Dark Ritual into Shieldred, and we know that there is typically not a lot of ways the Grixis Delver deck can get rid of that, because Lightning Bolt's not going to be enough. Cards like Shieldred's Edict you typically want to board out, I would be thinking, because, well, this is not a matchup where my opponent's going to be resolving all of, too many creatures, and if they are, it's Thassa's Oracle, at which point the game is usually over. So I would be boarding most of my removal out. Pyroblast also doesn't deal with it, so it looks like it actually sticks, and Mark's gonna
gain 6 life. Oh my god. Shieldred, I think Shieldred is a bane of these blue decks, whatever the format you're talking about, because you think you're safe until they just play Shieldred and you're like, well, that's actually problematic. And in this case, it's actually problematic because it will start attacking for 4, effectively disabling all the cantrips from Tim. And the way Tim could deal with it is, for example, Brazen Borrower, assuming it's even in the deck, because Tim might think, okay, I'm afraid of Teferi, so I've got Pyroblast, so I don't really need Petty Theft.
Right.
But Pyroblast does nothing here. Exile on Delver, so no pressure from Tim, no card advantage. Mark has more mana. Ay.
Yeah, Mark has more mana. He's also going to have more life thanks to that Shieldred, drawing cards for Brainstorm, suddenly gaining him a lot of life. So he is definitely in the driver's seat right now, and it's going to be interesting whether Tim actually finds a way to deal with that Shieldred or not.
Yeah, draw a card, gain life again.
Is it safe to say that if Tim doesn't find double Lightning Bolt, or maybe that Shieldred's Edict that stayed in his after sideboard, that he's just not going to be able to beat that Shieldred?
Yeah. So what he would have to do is do something like Murktide Regent Fly Over. Okay. So that could be one way, but this Regent would have to be big, and they would still need like 3 attacks. Oh my god, Teferi off of Carpet Mana, Veil of Summer, off of the trope that had not been wastelanded. So Tim double checking Veil and Pyroblast. Mark is just patiently waiting for the resolution.
Okay, so Veil of Summer says, spells you control cannot be countered this turn. You and permanents you control gain hexproof from blue and black. So despite the Pyroblast not being blue, it still stops the counter magic part on it. So the fairy gets protected, or makes it into play rather, gets protected from the Pyroblast on the stack, makes it into play, and now Mark is definitely in the driver's seat if he wasn't already, as that Shieldred can effectively just solo Tim now, unless he finds a way to deal with it, or like you mentioned, fly over with the Murktide.
Personally, this is exactly what I really like about this type of combo decks, that opponents really tunnel vision on how to beat you as a combo deck. But then Mark just comes out with like no Doomsdays, nothing combo related, and just goes, literally Shieldred into Teferi, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting lesson here. Like you mentioned during sideboarding, like if you over sideboard for some of the parts of your opponent's deck, if you over sideboard for their creatures, if you over sideboard for their combo, whatever deck it is, then they might just bring 1 or 2 cards out of the sideboard that you're just not ready to deal with. So it is very important to be thinking about how your opponent is sideboarding against your game key deck. So these Pyroblast are doing a lot of work against the Fairy, but you bringing in a black card can kind of play around that. And yeah, another role Lorien revealed off of that Carpet of Flowers. So Carpet of Flowers is doing so much work. I would say that's the card that's right now winning Mark the game.
And Mark actually missed the land drop again after Lorien revealed. So it's basically twice that's happened. I'll actually double check the land count. And Martin, I don't think you would guess how many lands Mark plays. Would you like to guess?
In the Doomsday deck, I'm gonna
Actual lands.
quickly take a look at it. Okay. So normally you play like 10 fetch lands and like 7 lands. You want like 1 basic so your opponent doesn't, wasteland your first land. So I would think like 7.
7 lands, 17, you mean?
7 like fetchable lands.
Oh, so he plays 15 lands total.
Okay.
15. And he plays 5, 6, 7, 8 fetchables.
Okay.
So over half his fetchables. Now, to be fair, that at a lot of cantrips, there are Lorien reveals, but there are 15 actual lands. So I'm not that surprised that he keeps missing on the land drop.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And
is that crazy to play such a low land count? Like, you can only fetch 6 of those lands, right? Cavern of Souls is not a fetchable land. So is that because you're playing cards like Lotus Petal? You have Dark Rituals? Like, do you just have so much card selection that you're fine with that? Aren't you just running too big of a risk against Wastelands?
I actually think you do. 15 is on the lower side. So, I mean, especially now, let's remember, Mark is the one who plays triple Teferi, triple D1 Ring in the main deck. So
Right.
with these cards, he still plays 15, right? So he must have done a lot of extensive testing to come to the conclusion.
On top of playing 4 colors, right? You really need your white source for the Fairy, for the source of Block series. You need triple black for Doomsday. You need your green mana to protect your combo. So yeah, this is definitely pushing it as much as you can if you're Mark.
Yeah, and now he's constructing a Doomsday pile with the Fairy protection shielded on the battlefield. Any card drawn will not kill him because, Shieldred gains more life than Bowmaster pings. He's got 33 life, so even if you half it, is almost the starting life total.
Okay, so what is Mark going to be looking for here? He is protected by the Fairy, so he knows that he can just go for it right now if he has the cards to do so. With Teferi in play, Tim would not be able to respond. What is Mark usually going to be looking for here?
So I'm not sure, for example, one big question, how much mana is floating there? It's possible that none is floating and just triple Black Walls of Carpet, but assuming nothing is floating and his hand is like Brainstorm, Edge of Autumn, so the cards we've seen, he can draw into Oracle, but he still needs double blue. So he might again see Lead or maybe some Lotus Petal action, because we still need to be able to produce double blue. So now he's counting the cards. I saw Brainstorm, I saw the Cavern of Souls, which is like triple protection, even though you've got Veil and Teferi.
And what goes through your mind? Are you trying to always put the Oracle last, to possibly try to protect it from something like a Thoughtseize that your opponent might have, or what? In these situations, the players are typically trying to think, what can I lose to, right? I'm very far ahead, so I need to make sure I don't screw up by forgetting one of the cards in my opponent's deck that is going to be able to break my combo, and I'm just going to die because I'm not going to have any cards in my library. So what are you trying to play around in a situation like this? Like, what goes through your head as a possible way for you to lose?
Yeah, so in the past, there was a very funny interaction that Ragavan could steal cards off the top of your library. So you actually had to take it into account. Now, we don't play cards like Thoughtscour in Legacy, so that's not really a consideration. But you can try to go through possible cards that might mill you somehow. But you really want to play against or maybe gear against something like Pyroblast, Hold Up, Force of Will, right? Because Pyroblast kills Teferi. There could be, Force of Will. And it's actually possible because there might be Force of Will in hand, drawn, let's say, last turn that could not have been deployed because Teferi has been on the battlefield for some time. And let's say the top deck was Pyroblast, right? So very reasonably, that could be Pyroblast from the top deck, Hold Up, Force of Will. So you want to play around this sequence. Now, from Mark's perspective, he's winning on 2 avenues at the same time because he's playing for the combo and he's got Shieldred going. So he's not really that worried. But he might risk losing to decking if he's really not careful. So Doomsday is this card that you go all in or all out.
Playing against a Grixis deck, do you think there is something that can happen to a Carpet of Flowers?
Not really. In the recent sets, Black has got the ability to remove enchantments. I think that has been actually officially added to the color pile. But in general, I'm not really afraid of my Carpet of Flowers. However, there could be cards like Echoing Truth or Stern Dismissal.
Okay.
So that could work. So this is another...
Stern Dismissal bounces an enchantment. Yeah, right. I was wondering, Javier revealed the Stern Dismissal in game 1 earlier in the first match. So I was wondering, what kinds of cards you're typically bouncing with that. That's interesting.
Yeah, so he could strangle Mark on mana a little bit, but we see Price of Progress, deploy a land.
That was one of the not as great Pride of Progresses I've ever seen, bringing Tim from 9 to 3 and Mark still at 14 with a Shieldred in play.
Yeah. And now we see Edge of Autumn, which basically says sacrifice a land cycling. So he floats a mana, cycles for free into a card from the library, and just plays Oracle because he's got Teferi plus Oracle. So he got 3 blue pips, 3 cards in the deck, and he just says, okay, the other 3 cards don't matter. I will try to win right now.
Yeah, with Teferi in play, there's not a whole lot Tim can do to stop Mark from winning the game on the spot. Says, yep, that resolves. Mark says, yep, well, then I win. Would you like to read it again? All right,
yes, and that does it. That was a handful of a match. A lot of decisions, a lot of navigating, planning bees. Lorien revealed twice as ancestral.
That was really cool. Congratulations to Mark for moving to 2-0. And the MVP of that match was certainly Carpet of Flowers. We are moving on to our backup feature match between Petr Sochurek and Alessandro Crosa. Peter playing 4-color control. That does not surprise me. Peter really likes his value decks. He loves cards like Uro, Up the Beanstalk. He loves drawing cards, and he loves playing control decks. Alessandro, on the other hand, Dimir Scam. So he is going to be looking for those early powerful openings with Grief and Reanimate, perhaps getting a Troll of Khazad-dûm into play on turn 1, something along or turn 2, something along those lines, while holding counter magic to try to stop Peter from using cards like the Fairy or Uro. Here we're taking a look at Peter's deck. 4-color control, pretty typical for Legacy for right now. Half a year ago, you would be looking at cards like some different removal other than Leyline Binding. But because we have Up the Beanstalk now, we can also fetch all these Tri-lands now and different kinds of duels. This deck typically just tends to be built around Up the Beanstalk to feature as many expensive cards as possible. Obviously, we have Force of Will, Leyline Binding, Lorien Revealed, cards like that. There's also the One Ring typically in these decks. And Dimir Scam, that's a pretty typical deck. You have some cheap threats with Grief and Reanimate, the Reanimate package, but you also have a lot of counter magic and some cheap card selection spells.
Yeah, and the moment you said Dimir Scam, I went straight to the deck list to double check if there is any spice in it. And boy, oh boy, is there spice in it. Because it's not actually blue-black Scam, because it's black Scam. there is no blue mana in this deck. There is 4 Dodgy Voidwalker. There is 4 Opposition Agent, triple Shieldred. There is literally no blue mana there.
Oh wow! So Alessandro is actually So that's a miscible deck. Alessandro is actually playing mono black. He is playing a mono black. Yeah, you could call it scam. You could call it mid range. He does have the Grief reanimate combo, but there's also 4 copies of Opposition Agent. He has cards like Sheer Dread, Thoughtseize, Hymn to Torque, Dark Ritual. So yeah, this is a mono black. I would say mid range.
Yeah, exactly. And what I would like to add to that, and it immediately made me smile, there are 2 copies of Field of Ruin. Actual, factual Field of Ruin. So, yeah, that's cute. That's cute. Field of Ruin in the opposing, 4-color deck. Yeah, but right now, up the Beanstalk on the battlefield, Teferi gets played. Makes me wonder if it's Legacy or Modern right now. Bounces up the Beanstalk for even more card draw. Yeah, so right now we've got Orcish Bowmaster killing off the Teferi, pass the turn, 3 mana, untap. And let's see what comes out of it. We can't really make out what's in Petr's hand, keeping the cards close to his chest. We've got Esper mana plus green available. So we're lacking red for full domain. Bowmaster from Petr killing the opposing Bowmaster. So the dynamic we've already mentioned multiple times, you want to be the last one playing the Bowmasters. And they're just switching tokens around. Land drop, so there is red.
So is this what control decks look like in the format right now? Like typically when you think control, at least I'm thinking, okay, cards like Planeswalkers, cards like Sweepers, perhaps some counter magic. Right now, a lot of these 4-color decks in Legacy are running cards like Delighted Halfling, so they can power up the Fairy, the One Ring, Uro. They're also running cards like Orcish Bowmasters, obviously, because the card is just too good not to play it. Does that mean that they're now typically just not playing any sweepers?
Yeah, so I think I wouldn't be surprised to see, let's say, 1-2 Supreme Verdict or 1-2 Terminus. So we don't see like full on Miracles list like we used to in the past, but sometimes I still see a couple of copies of Terminus here and there. So as Alessandro, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of a Supreme Verdict or Terminus. Now, the presence of Orcish Bowmaster specifically makes me think there might not be any sweepers. Terminus has the added bonus of triggering up the Beanstalk, which is pretty cute.
Okay.
So that could also come up.
How many cards are typically in these decks that draw you a card when Up the Beanstalk is in play? So it sounds honestly like it's usually half the deck, right? It's Leyline Binding, Lorien Revealed, Force Erlingus is another card.
Force of Will.
Force of Will. You can have Terminus, like you mentioned. You can hardcast Force of Will. So yeah, it sounds like it's almost half the deck triggering Up the Beanstalk and drawing additional cards. But yeah, the one card you don't want your opponent to have when you're drawing cards is Orcish Bowmaster. So Peter is probably not going to be happy about Alessandro resolving it here, and he is going to need a response. He's going to need to find some kind of removal spell. I think that is a Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah, exactly. So I immediately see Swords to Plowshares get rid of that 3/3 token. Now, the issue is that even though there is a 3/3 token, which might get Petr down to 12 or 9 or even 6, is that Petr will start accruing more and more cards, and every single turn it will just start snowballing. So Alessandro has to react fast. Triple Swamp adds a Wasteland. And 4 mana. Oh my god, this is a kicked Turak. Kicked Turak Dread Cantor. Wow. Protection from white. So let me see how Pet can actually deal with it. So he can block it with Uro. Or Bowmasters. But when it comes to actual removing, There is no way, actually. So Turak will stay on the battlefield forever, probably.
Oh yeah, you're right. It doesn't get bounced by the fairy. It doesn't get killed by Leyline Binding. You can target it with Swords to Plowshares. Is there anything else Peter can have?
So I'm looking at the sideboard. So there could be Pernicious Deed.
Wow, Pernicious Deed, the actual old school way to destroy permanents.
Yeah, or you could maybe play Dress Down, remove the abilities, and then kill it. So that is these two ways you could go about it. Yeah, so right now, Petr lining up 5 mana.
The thing with Up the Beanstalk is that you have to draw the cards. It's not a May option. So Peter, when that Bowmasters is in play, has to be very careful, or just in general, you have to be very careful with too many copies of Up the Beanstalk, because if you're not running, a Yorion deck, you can very easily just completely run out of cards in some situations.
Yeah. Okay, so untap 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 power on the battlefield. That's almost half the life total. Wasteland waits unused. Thoughtseize on the opponent reveals Pernicious Deed.
Wow. That's perfect timing for the Thoughtseize.
Wow. And also, Turak gets a counter because it also triggers whenever a card is discarded. So that's attack for 8. It's an actual 2-turn clock. Petr has 1 draw step.
I believe Peter has Uro in the graveyard, though, so he would be able to just bring that back next turn unless Alessandro is able to take him off the right colors of mana. And I think there is only 1 green source, yeah?
Yes, there is 1 green. Petr takes the draw. And fetches a green.
So that would put him to what? That's like 6 life after the fetch, gets a duel, brings back Uro, puts him to 9.
Yeah. To 9, Turak attacks for 5, but can be blocked because doesn't have any menace or stuff like that. So this is actually pretty good. This Uro might pull the game. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Exile the appropriate cards. When it comes to the removal, Alessandro could play. There is Shieldred's Edict, and that's about it. Dismember doesn't do it, although you can make it smaller in combat. And Shieldred's Edict! Actually, Shieldred's Edict called it. Uro goes down immediately as soon as it came onto the battlefield. Wow. And to be fair, I've seen more Shieldred's Edicts than I had expected. And we're just now on round 2. So Shieldred Edict, wow, and Handshake from Petr. Double Beanstalk, Teferi opening wasn't enough. Turak Dread Cantor, takes the game. Nice win there for Mono Black scam.
Okay, so it looks like the game count was not updated, and I believe that might have been the 3rd game of the match. Yeah, so congratulations to our Mono Black player who we thought was running Dimir Scam. As it turns out, it was a Mono Black deck with all the annoying cards. Like if you are playing control, you don't want your opponent to be casting Thoughtseizes and Hymn to Thorax and cards like that. So that was round number 2. We would like to give a shout out to our sponsors as well. So we have a little promotion for Ultimate Guard. If you are looking for any kind of gaming accessories like sleeves, deck boxes, binders, all that kinds of stuff, make sure you go take a look at Ultimate Guard products. If you go to ultimateguard.com, you can visit the store right now, and with this code you can see on the stream Eternal UG10, you can save 10% of all your purchases throughout the weekend. I believe the code is also going to be available on Monday if you want to do some last minute shopping. So again, shout out to our sponsor Ultimate Guard, who is not only a sponsor of this event but also worked closely with us with the Channel Fireball team, and just in general they have been a bigger and bigger part of the Magic community lately. So yeah, that was round number 2. I believe we're going to be taking a little break now, perhaps 3-5 minutes, and we're going to be back after that with me and Philip for round 3. So stay with us, and we'll be right back.